we'll discuss one of the coolest but least discussed starfighters in the Star Wars universe, the Starviper, on today's video. Shadows of the Empire for the N64 was, I think, the first video game alongside Pilot Wings that I ever owned. We've been talking a lot about the Shadows of the Empire media project over the past few weeks, but really, it is the game which, for me, had the longest lasting impact. You know, in hindsight, it's definitely a lesser version of its cousins in the Dark Forces series. I mean, especially compared to Dark Forces 2 on a technical level, that game coming out just a few months later, but the game had me hooked, and I distinctly remember as a kid who loved the space battles spending a ton of time flying around during the final battle of Coruscant. The game is cool, by the way, because you get a look at Coruscant before it was ever mentioned in the movies. Anyway, during that battle and in the lead up to it, you'd encounter a vehicle which I would personally become totally obsessed with, the Starviper. Interestingly, the Virago itself, Prince Xizor's Starviper, is mentioned in the Shadows of the Empire novel, but the vehicle gets no real description, which, I mean, look at it. If there's a vehicle that ever deserved a description, it is, of course, the Starviper. But how good was this thing? How powerful was the Starviper line of fighters? We'll talk about that. And we'll just briefly mention the Virago, which was Xizor's specialized personal fighter. The Virago was fairly heavily modified, but it says a lot that Prince Xizor actually chose it of any other vehicle as an escape craft from his personal fortress on Coruscant. The man had more money than nearly anyone in the galaxy. Prince Xizor didn't have, however, just the single fighter. He was the head of Black Sun, the criminal syndicate, and they had what the novel calls an entire navy stationed over Coruscant, sort of in an uneasy truce with the Empire, especially during this era. What's interesting is that much of Xizor's navy seemed to be surplus, old dreadnoughts and carracks is kind of what I imagine based on the book's description, but the Starviper and Xizor's ship, the Virago, were actually custom designed by Black Sun in collaboration with Mando Motors. And as an adult, I certainly noticed this and I was very glad the connection was made. The Starviper looks a lot like a Mandalorian Basilisk war droid. It's the combination of the sort of offset plating, the sharp angles, the four wings sort of looking like the Basilisk's legs, and if you want a recap on that creation, I've done an entire video all about it. Either way, the Starviper not only looked cool, but was an incredibly potent vehicle. According to the New Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, and I quote, "When he first commissioned the Virago, Xizor demanded a starship that could rival the Imperial TIE Interceptor in both speed and agility. Mando Motors succeeded here by providing the starship with 4 adjustable wings, each capped with 2 micro thrusters. Both the wings and thrust nacelles constantly moved during flight, creating the illusion that the Virago was a bizarre living creature." The Virago really does pull from the TIE Interceptor, not only with the focus on incredible speed and maneuverability, but also the lack of any real fuselage. It's all cockpit plus wings. However, each individual Starviper was actually better armored than something like a TIE Interceptor, and certainly more expensive. It also had an onboard deflector shield, which again was something a TIE Interceptor generally did not come with. We'll get to weapons in a second because there's some interesting bits there, but one thing that's also notable about the Starviper is that the wings worked with similar S-foil technology like X-wings, and thus the Virago could actually reconfigure itself for fast in-atmosphere flying, which really makes sense for a criminal organization like Black Sun. Yes, they would have been doing things in space, but a lot of Black Sun's business was dropping the hammer on people and organizations which didn't pay them their protection money or whatever else. The Starviper could go down to a planet and cause some real havoc. I'll jump back to the other purposes of this vehicle in just a second, but I mentioned weaponry. The New Essential Guide to Weapons and Vehicle also explains that Black Sun had a somewhat difficult predicament wherein, although they were allied with the Empire, when creating this vessel, Mando Motors was still worried about bumping up against Imperial weaponry laws. So instead of attaching high-powered weaponry, they focused on making an advanced experimental laser sighting system. Black Sun would later add weapons on their own. The guide describes them as mounted on a forward extending arm with a 180-degree field of fire. This reminds me a lot of how the A-Wings laser cannons can swivel, but to a much greater degree, and I assume it's the advanced targeting system which really facilitates that. Alongside the laser cannons, the Starviper could be outfitted with a pair of proton torpedo launchers. The Virago itself certainly was. Interestingly, I think the Starviper reminds me most of something like the later TIE Predator, which could fully fold its wings back or forward depending on its configuration. But of course, visually, the Starviper is its own thing. You can see similarities in some other Mandal Motors vessels, like the Comric, for example, again, with the sharp lines and the variable wings. But what else is there to know about the Starviper itself? Why didn't we see more of these across the Star Wars galaxy? Well, the ship was great for Black Sun. We don't, however, see it used a whole lot outside of that final battle over Coruscant. However, Black Sun, alongside their criminal empire, had a legitimate shipping business, which itself would have made Xizor one of the most influential and rich men in the galaxy, so you can see how the Starviper could have been great for escorting transport ships across the galaxy. Black Sun was even procured to help with construction of the second Death Star, so that kind of talks to the scale of the organization. Xizor gave the Emperor hundreds and hundreds of ships. The thing is, in Legends, Black Sun really goes down during the events, or really at the end of the events of Shadows of the Empire, where Xizor's skyhook is destroyed by Vader in the book, Rendar in the video game. The prince presumably goes down with it, and Black Sun more or less just falls apart. With Xizor dead, both the New Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels and the Saga Edition Starships of the Galaxy Guide explain that, and I quote, "Mandal Motors wasted little time in regaining the rights to the Starviper design following Xizor's death. The newest iteration of the Starviper is not as fast or as agile as the original prototype, but Mandal Motors felt that some concessions were unavoidable in order to bring the price into line with the market as a whole. Keep in mind that outside of the missing speed, other Starvipers, which may have even been sold widely, wouldn't have had the weaponry as well. By the time a faction not named the Empire would have been able to buy these in any sort of numbers, we have the Rebel Alliance, who were building their own ship types or buying their own preferred ship types. Interestingly, in Legends, the Mandalorians actually really restart their shipbuilding during the Fate of the Jedi era, sort of like 40 years after the Battle of Yavin. I would have liked to see the Starviper pop up again, but they do make some good ships of their own, which I should probably talk in a later video. It's just tough because we only get some brief references. That's all for me today, though. Until next time, guys, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.